So look, I know for some watch buyers it's all about how the watch makes them feel, the look and style of the thing, and for others it's all about the feature set. So today, for them, I'm taking a look at a whole selection of features found in wristwatches of all prices to determine which are worthwhile and which, frankly, are completely unnecessary. Fair warning, some will be controversial. I'm prepared for the comments. If you're feeling both humbled and blessed, why not pick up a sweater down in the description below. Let's kick things off in the overrated category with a complication I am indeed very fond of, but still think is as useful as a Faraday cage phone case: the chronograph. Is it the machination of multiple microscopic moments marching majestically in a movement? Yes, it's as majestic as fuck. Is it the pinnacle of mechanical mastery meets great value watchmaking? You bet your candy ass it is. Try finding a mechanical complication with this many parts for less. But, and it's a soggy but, it's still overrated. I mean that from a functional perspective. Emotions have at 'em. The chronograph is great for the feels, but for function, distinctly overrated. Why? Because who am I to be timing things? My microwave already has a timer. My oven already has a timer. My Anaconda Depthmaster Pro already has a timer. When I wear a chronograph, just about the only thing I use it to time is a short sit down in a small room with a ceramic chair, and only when I've somehow forgotten my phone. Before the days of smartphones, when I were a lad and I had to go to school and back uphill both ways with gravel in my shoes, a chronograph provided a form of entertainment whereby one would attempt to stop the seconds at a premeditated point. It was either that or read the shampoo bottle. But now, I can't even think of the last time I gainfully used a chronograph, except to check that it still works. It's the rear fog light of the watch industry, a feature that could be busted for years and you never even know. I love them, especially when they're manually wound with all that noodly stuff in the back, but are they overrated? In a way that makes the Mona Lisa look like IMAX. And like Skyrim is also overrated. Once upon a time, watchmakers were like, if a watch doesn't quite fit right, suck it up, buttercup. And then they compromised and were like, here are a few holes that you'll need an unfolded paperclip and a whole load of scratches to adjust. And that was fair enough. Today, however, watch manufacturers put more engineering effort into their on-the-fly easy-sleeve micro-adjust systems than was mustered for the entirety of Action Park, and I think that's all a bit too much. Is it handy to be able to adjust your clasp to get a snug fit? Of course, but we've been able to do that with the paperclip and scratches for years already. Are the new contraptions crammed into clasps helpful in allowing that adjustment without leaving a lasting reminder? I can't argue with that. It is functionally easier. But here's the thing, the reason I think this type of clasp is overrated. I can't think of a single bracelet watch I've owned where, once the bracelet is set, I go back and reset it. And let's say Christmas was a particularly heavy one and the watch is starting to turn my hand a little bit blue. Good. The challenge of finding another paperclip to unbend serves as a reminder to get my post-Christmas podge onto the Peloton and back where it came from. Elasticated trousers were the downfall of a healthy generation, and ease of adjustment in a ratcheted sprung levered mega clasp will be too. You may say I'm just being bitter, since it took me a month and a trip halfway around the world to get an XL link for my Alpine Eagle, which requires a doctorate in micromechanics to fit, but I'll tell you one thing. Once that link was fitted and the watch clipped onto my wrist just how I wanted it, the satisfaction of a job well done couldn't have been bettered. Let's see the guide lock do that. Now, I'll be open and honest, I'm not an international travelling salesman looking to record my favourite shows on VCR by reminding someone back home to hit record 5 minutes before broadcast, but I don't think the GMT function is all that it's made out to be. Sure, it works well to remind pilots of the last time they topped up on benzoyl-ligonene, but for most everyone else, it's really just an excuse to channel the ghost of Chuck Yeager. As mentioned, I travelled abroad recently to get a link for my show part. Well, I was abroad and I got a link while I was there. Anyway, there was a 5-hour time difference between where I was and where I came from, and given that I have enough hands to both hold my watch with one and count to 5 on the other, I didn't find myself wanting. Perhaps if I'd gone further afield to a place more hours away than 5, it would have been more challenging. Maybe, but generally my mental arithmetic is pretty good in integers up to 10. Not boasting, so I think I would have done a fairly good job of it. I know that's a bit like when someone thinks they'd be fast on track with literally zero experience bar repeatedly watching Days of Thunder, but I'm confident. And do you know why? Because I think I had to work out what the time was back home like once, and I had ages to do it. In all honesty, I'm struggling to think of more than a handful of reasons at best why anyone would have to consistently and frequently check the time back home. In previous videos, I've always described the GMT function as a tool to know whether or not I was waking Nana, and that's because I couldn't think of anything else. I'm sure there are plenty of professional reasons, but I can't imagine the professional solution is a 75-year-old piece of outdated tech. Unless you're looking for a business reason to write off a Rolex, that is. Word on the street is that you're not subscribed, and I just want to say I'm not judging, and I'm not even sure if my intel is correct, but if you fancy doing your old pal Andrew a solid, click the shit out of that subscribe button. Muchas gracias. And that's just in time for our next overrated functionality, and for this one we're digging deep, because that's what you'll have to do to prove that I'm wrong. I'm talking about water resistance, and yes, swimming downwards is technically digging a hole in water, if you think about it. I'm not knocking splash resistance or even swim resistance. I'm talking about 100 meters plus of depth rating that you are almost entirely never going to use. This is, I suppose, also a bit of a rant about the depth rating system, which can go and take a running jump from the distance it thinks a watch needs to be waterproof to just to get it wet. Like, if the bods behind it think a watch needs to be 50 meters water resistant just to be near water when you wash your hands, what does 1 meter get you? The ability to hold a sealed bottle of Evian. It's good to have the peace of mind to know a light rain shower won't warrant a call to the insurance company. But the minimum requirement of several hundred meters water resistance to wash a car with is simply Rambo levels of overkill. The only time anyone ever goes that deep is reading 100 Years of Solitude. Here's a question for you, and feel free to leave an answer down in the comments alongside the one you already left telling me I was wrong about the GMT. Why do you like mechanical watches? Like, enough to actually buy and wear one and go online and watch videos about them? For me, it's about maintaining my baller influencer lifestyle, but it's also about engineering, and in a way, the artistry. If I were to say what my hobbies are generally, they all boil down to problem solving, really. How do I get a faster lap time on Assetto Corsa Competizione? It's a problem that needs solving, mainly by actually learning how to drive and not just repeatedly watching Days of Thunder. How do I take cool pictures of space? The problem is lack of funds to buy expensive astrophotography equipment that requires learning how to hack my wife's bank account and then how to cover it all up to make it look like a clerical error. Mechanical watchmaking is simply a collection of genius solutions to very tricky problems. And I think that's an interest that's innate in watch enthusiasts. Look at the birth year watch, for example, a genius solution to the need for an excuse to buy another watch, and one that pays off both for yourself and with the birth of every child you have. So I'll cut to the chase. I like seeing the oily bits in a watch to get vicarious satisfaction from the solution to centuries-old problems, and I don't like the automatic winding mechanism getting in the way. I'd simply rather wind the watch every single day. It's not that hard, is it? A mechanical watch winding itself is like invincibility in Dark Souls. Remember, if you're not suffering, you're not having fun. The next one I actually realised when it occurred to me I'd owned a watch for a number of years and had no idea what colour the lume was. Not in its natural daylight state, obviously, but at night, in the dark, glowing faintly, for about 5 minutes before it ran out. Now, as I get older and my eyes ain't what they used to be, the last smouldering remnants of photoluminescent paint may as well be tucked up in my drawer with my undercrackers, for all the use it is to me. And besides, I have a bedside lamp with a clock on it, and a phone as well, and the room glows like a Chernobyl Christmas tree with all the various standby and charging lights peppered around the room on a multitude of devices. So I personally think the use of lume is overrated, at least in the everyday. Those cosplaying Jacques Cousteau may think different. The This next one is a tough one, actually, and I'm kind of torn even mentioning it. But I will, because I'm not the type to post a Facebook status that says, "Worst day ever, don't even ask me about it." No, the reason for my consternation is because I think this particular feature is good, just massively overplayed by the industry. Okay, out with it already. I'm talking about meteorite dials. I think by now you'll know that I'm obsessed with space, mainly due to the absence of other humans, and that I find meteorites especially cool, since they have a pattern achieved through millions of years of cooling that, as of yet, can't be replicated on Earth. I like it so much, in fact, that I have a block of it, just a cube of meteorite of my very own that may or may not be a portal to hell. I'm waiting to see on that front. Here's where it becomes a point of contention. That cube, from which I could reasonably extract between 5 to 10 dials should I be so inclined, cost $200. Not 200 megadollars, not $200 in 1846 money, just $200. Meteorite isn't expensive. Right, there's a meteorite called Gibeon that came down in Namibia that was a primary source for a lot of dials from the likes of Rolex, that's since been classified as a national monument and can no longer be plundered. But the next best favourite from Scandinavia, Muon Ion Luster, is indistinguishably the same, at least to my eye. It may taste different, I don't know. I'm waiting to see on that front too. Why you'd prefer a meteorite that hit one place versus another, I don't really know, unless that place in particular. There's actually another Namibian meteorite that came down called Hoba that's not even been touched, because it weighs over 60 tons and it's too heavy for anyone to even be bothered moving. So, meteorite. Cool? Yes. Expensive? No. Overrated in watchmaking? Astronomically. Okay, so to give you some time to recover from the hard truths of overrated watch functions, let's now move over to the ever-positive underrated section, where we celebrate the lesser appreciated options available in our wristwatches. Now, we start with something I think you'll consider to be hypocritical, and I expect you might even rewind the tape to see if you can spot the moment I suffered a head injury. But I assure you, this will all make sense in the end. The first most underrated watch feature is the clasp extension. Yes, I know I classified the Quick Adjust bracelet as an overrated feature, but hear me out. I'm talking about the little fold-over link in a Rolex clasp that pulls out just a little bit, and is very, very different. If the Quick Adjust is the yoga pants of watchmaking, the clasp extension is the button pop after a big meal. You don't intend to keep it that way, and when it's extended, you know at some point you've got to put it back again. That's because, like the post-Christmas dinner button pop, the clasp extension is for use in one scenario and one scenario only. Holiday, vacation, sun, sea and sand. Hot days by the beach when you swell up with heat and mojitos. There's something so relaxing about cracking open that clasp extension, knowing it marks wheels up on the cloying suffocation of the daily grind. Sometimes what's most underrated doesn't really make itself known until the stars align, and it wasn't until I enjoyed spending time with an hourly chime that I realised how much value it added to my existence. Not just because my dog doesn't like it and so it stopped him annoying me, but because sometimes I have a habit of getting lost in something and letting time run away. But you're wearing a watch, is the obvious retort to this existential impairment. Yes, genius, but then I'd have to remember to look at it first, wouldn't I? So having my watch bring me back down to planet Earth on occasion, an hour will suffice to stop me shriveling up into a dried husk of a dehydrated person, is actually a fantastically useful and underappreciated feature. The other reason I think it's underappreciated is because since it's now become synonymous with bargain complications, I don't think the true extent of its complexity is actually understood. The mechanism is one thing, winding back a sprung hammer and dropping it from the tippy top of a snail cam at the height of every hour, but the biggest challenge really comes from a lesser known data point called amplitude. Think of the power of an engine as amplitude, and the gearbox, diff and all-wheel drive systems etc. as the various downstream elements that you get in a wristwatch, like the gear train, hands, date and so on. These all sap power from that engine, and if you have too many, you don't have enough power to drive them all. This happens in watchmaking, and adding big complications like an hour strike without eating up all that amplitude is very hard. Put it this way, old oil in the jewel sinks can cause enough friction to drop the amplitude too low, So you can imagine how efficient you have to make a mechanism that draws enough energy to be heard over millennia, Blade of Miquella. Now, I mentioned my waning eyesight reducing my ability to read a luminous watch at night, but there's another side effect of getting on in years that's also affecting my enjoyment of this hobby. I'm starting to like old man watches. Small, yellow gold, and hard to read. I don't know why older men are drawn to watches that need a young man's vision to use, and perhaps it's because time goes so fast when you get old you don't want a constantly spinning reminder of your own shrivelling mortality. But whatever, I'm getting older and I like small gold watches I can't really read. So I am hugely grateful for, and often find myself hankering after, good anti-reflective coating. Ideally in many layers, ideally on the inside where it won't get scratched into shredded wheat, and ideally not of the variety that switches up everything into an iPhone 65 music video. Good anti-reflective coating compared to bad or none at all is so night and day it can turn what may as well just be a bracelet into Big Ben. It's the secret to our Lange & Söhne's incredible HD movements. Well, that and the incredible movements. Great or even good anti-reflective coating is like when you try on someone else's glasses because you think you're funny. But the joke's on you because you realise everything is actually supposed to be crisp, and now you have to battle with the acceptance of aging and deterioration, or you can just keep pretending that it's just because you're tired and it'll clear up after a good night's rest. It's like that, but for watches. Combine the two and your watches will be so razor sharp you could cut a fool. So I was having this wonderful time over with my Patreons on Patreon. Thank you, by the way, Patreons. And you can too if you want by joining my Patreon. It's available over on Patreon. Link to my Patreon in the description below. Thank you. For our next Slept On surprise, I bring you the contents of an old lady's jewellery box, the unloved and underrepresented material that is mother of pearl. Now, I'll be the first to admit that most applications of this seashell skid marks look like they should smell of potpourri and formaldehyde, and are best suited to applications age appropriate for their elderly audience, like, I don't know, false teeth and casual racism. But that doesn't have to be the end of the road for this iridescent delight. When used properly, by tinting it or smashing it into pieces and gluing it all back together again, for example, mother of pearl can look absolutely spectacular. See it in a different light, quite literally, and it becomes apparent that it plays with layers and colour and shape in a way no other material can match. And even better, every single slice of it is unique. It's just like a fingerprint, when it's in the middle of a piece of steel without any kind of effort and you just want to wipe it off. Frame it up a bit different though, and you'll appreciate and enjoy the swirling patterns found within. I think the trick is that by itself it's just too typecast as the calling card of the decrepit, so you can't just slap it on a dial and call it job done. It's too tainted, like the blood dripping from mined natural diamonds, but instead of blood it's Chanel No. 5. Or like my Livestrong wristband, which I stopped wearing once I found out he'd had performance enhancing surgery to make him lighter. So when it's distorted in some way, adapted, fragmented, that's when I think it really starts to shine. Another tricky watchmaking feat to achieve, and one that's not often appreciated, is thinness, the art of removing enough material from a watch's depth to make it sit flat against the wrist, not so much to aid its retreat under a shirt sleeve, unless you live in central London, but more because there's something inherently impressive about the pursuit of the edge of the impossible. We've recently seen a war waged in the theatre of thinness between brands duking it out for the ultra-thin crown, but in the wise words of Shania Twain, that don't impress me much. Those high-priced communion wafers wouldn't last 5 minutes on the wrist of your average Wall Street banker, and so my admiration is aimed roundly at the ultra-thin watches that can be actually considered wearable. I'm talking sub 6-7mm watches that still look like watches and don't require either the dexterity of a neurosurgeon for ants to operate, or some kind of cumbersome addition like an 80s mobile phone. Like, you know, a watch. Making stuff at this scale smaller, thinner, lighter, whatever, becomes an exponentially more difficult task very quickly, because generally the reliability and accuracy of a movement is dependent on rigidity, stability, and robustness. All of that becomes much harder to manage as a caliber becomes reduced in size and especially thickness, since it all becomes a lot more, well, floppy. I'm sure you've experienced that problem. Like, for example, if you've ever tried to move a mattress around by yourself. Margin for error becomes a lot tighter, parts become easier to break, and the materials then chosen to combat this also typically become harder to work with, so it's just a great big pain in the butt to manage. And I don't think a lot of people really fully appreciate that. I, for one, am glad to be seeing the back of watch flipping and am very much enjoying seeing watches come down to prices that are a bit more sensible, and waitlist shrinking from crowds of people to just a trickle too. As Rolex CEO Jean-Frédéric Dufour quite rightly said, "Watches are not investments, and Omega can go suck my balls," or words to that effect. He's absolutely spot on. Omega can suck his balls. Also, the idea of a wristwatch being treated as a commodity is ridiculous. It's only because of the possibility to make money from things like Fartcoin that a tangible physical object seems like a sensible money-making asset. After all, 3/4 of it won't just magically disappear one night or get peeled off the wall and eaten. Without the context of a mad, mad world to justify it, wristwatch investment, especially when it comes to mass-produced watches as rare as pigeon shit in Trafalgar Square, is nonsense. But that attitude in itself has taken a tangentially related topic and tarred it with the same brush. I'm talking about value retention, resale value. I think one of the most underrated aspects of a wristwatch's desirability is the possibility to own it without losing every single penny. Let's be clear, what I'm not saying is to buy a watch on the basis of getting everything back and more. I'm saying that it's reassuring when a watch nets out at a much smaller loss over an ownership period. The reason I say this is because it allows ordinary people to dare tread on levels in which they'd otherwise be unable. Is this sensible financial advice? No, of course not. But it's true. The most of us factor in the lifetime cost of a watch as part of the justification of being able to buy it, but for fear of being labelled a flipper, we keep that shit to ourselves. Oh boy, so this is the big one, the part of watchmaking I think is the most underappreciated of all, and one that's underappreciated to the peril of the rest of the industry. It's challenging, it's certainly contentious, and it's Chinese. Yes, the perception of Chinese watchmaking coming with a side of broken English and broken parts on AliExpress is no longer true. Well, it is true, but it's not the whole truth. You see, after years of making 40% of the value of Swiss-made watches, China's got game. Watchmaking game. It's especially challenging, I think, because of political tensions with China and concerns about working practices. But from a purely objective watchmaking perspective, China is starting to make watches that aren't just good, but really good. Well finished, highly complicated, really good. And cheap. Relatively so, at least. The $1,000 Seagull tourbillon was just the beginning, something easily dismissed as a bit of a novelty. But soon we're going to see a twin-axis tourbillon with a top drawer finish for around $25,000, considerably less than any other equivalent Swiss-made watch. I think what's truly underrated here is the ability of Chinese watchmakers to start replacing the products we desire in the West with examples of their own. We laughed at the Chinese range fovers and the iPhones. That last one works better when you see it written. And now brands like BYD and MG are entering the market with seemingly high quality options that cost a lot less and don't look like a melted troll doll. Whether you like it or not, whether you agree with what I'm saying or don't, mark my words, it's coming. And if you're not so sure about it, remember, you can always practice in the meantime by simply counting up all the things we already get made in China, which is basically everything. Goodbye.